Senator Rubio.
Thank you. This whole topic of China, I think, is so much more than just the balance of trade. And among the, President Xi sort of certainly views himself as a historic and transformational figure, and one of their goals is to remake the global order more in their image and more advantageous to them. And many of the things that are being talked about here today are part of it. I mean, if you look at the record, the abuses that are well documented against the Uyghur Muslims, trying to strip the people of Tibet of their identity and their religion, the long-standing attacks on Falun Gong practitioners. Obviously, we know the stress that Christianity has faced. And then on the field of democracy, we've seen the erosion of it in Hong Kong, the disqualification of 4 pro-democracy lawmakers from the ballot, the jailing of 3 prominent pro-democracy student leaders. And then you see sort of what the global reaction has been to it. And there's reason to be concerned that this post-World War II, pro-democracy, pro-human rights global norms are being eroded and reshaped, and that China is using its geopolitical heft and its economic power to push it in that direction. Look at Senator Markey just mentioned the silence of the Muslim world in the face of the forced internment of hundreds of thousands of Muslims in Muslim Uyghurs. In the UN, for example, in April, security forces ejected an ethnic Uyghur representing a accredited non-governmental organization, clearly at the request of somebody. He was accredited. He was in Greece, blocked the European Union from issuing a statement or a position at the Human Rights Council. For the first time, I believe, ever, a definitive statement, delivering a statement, and we can all surmise why. They own every port in Greece. They have incredible economic leverage on Greece. I mean, the list goes on. In 2017, the UN Secretary General introduced President Xi at an event that was closed to civil society, by the way, and he made no reference of the human rights environment in China. The EU Council and Commission at a summit in Brussels on the 1st and 2nd of June publicly, quote-unquote, expressed concern about human rights abuses in China, but didn't call for the release of political prisoners, including their own citizens of the EU, or even the repeal of abusive laws. In June, this is all from a report, I believe, from Human Rights Watch, but in June, Italian police briefly detained and later released the same ethnic Uyghur NGO representative who had been invited to speak at the Italian Senate, and they briefly detained him, even though he had been invited to be there. Again, it's not clear whether the Chinese requested that. On issue after issue, it appears to us you can see around the world that even nations that long have been committed to democracy and human rights, when it comes to China, are either being quiet, looking the other way, or frankly are now leveraged to the point where they cannot speak out. And so that's why it's so important for the United States to be forceful about it, because no one else can or wants to. And when others do want to, you're concerned when we don't join them. So as an example, earlier this month, there were 15 Western ambassadors in Beijing, spearheaded by Canada. They reportedly sent a letter to the Xinjiang's Communist Party chief, Chen Guangguo. He's seeking a meeting and expressing deep concern regarding the growing crackdown. No one thought that meeting was going to happen, per se. But I'm curious, Ms. Stone, why didn't the U.S. sign on to that letter? Do you know?
So we agree with you completely. Thank you very much for the question and the clear statement of support for the U.S. speaking out strongly on the human rights conditions in China and also the conditions in Xinjiang. The specific letter, sometimes the countries involved, they are like-minded partners. And we may or may not join on any kind of particular measure that's coming out of the embassies in Beijing. But I do want to assure you that we are working consistently with those like-minded partners to do real action. And the thing is, we have many more tools, and we also have a lot more spine sometimes to be able to actually take real action.
And I appreciate, I'm running out of time. I just want to make the point that if we're here complaining on the one hand about how all these countries aren't doing enough, when they actually do something, we can't even sign on to a letter. I don't know if that decision was made here in D.C. as part of the broader relationship with China or made by the ambassador, but I think it was a big mistake. In your written testimony, you mentioned the fact that Chinese security services are harassing Uyghurs abroad. We've heard firsthand from people who say this is the case. Can you tell us if the department is working with other agencies on this issue, in particular protecting U.S. citizens and legal permanent residents? And And what sort of outreach is anyone doing to these communities who feel like the long arm of China is reaching them here within the United States?
Yes, we are. We're working closely with the FBI to make sure that any information that comes our way goes to them, and we'd be very happy if you hear of anything in additional to also work with you to pass that along. And in terms of making sure that the message gets out, whenever we meet with the communities, we do everything we can. We also ensure that we're constantly updating our travel guidance to make sure that people are aware of the situation.
Well, again, my last question is, in this particular case, these are people inside the United States, so they're not, but I agree with the travel part. Finally, in your written testimony, you indicated that the Department of State had conducted outreach to U.S. and Chinese companies with businesses in Xinjiang to draw attention to the risks of their exposure to these abuses. There's a company, Thermo Fisher Scientific, which has sold DNA sequencers to the police there. This is against the backdrop of these grave human rights violations, including, by the way, mandatory data banking of the entire population. I had testimony last week at the commission that bipartisan bicameral commission on China, that they are forcing people to turn over blood and to get a passport, or just compelling it. Thermo Fisher Scientific, an American company, is selling them DNA sequencers. That's what it's used for. Can you tell us whether that is one of the companies that the Department of State has reached out to and expressed concerns about how their technology could be used by the Chinese to do these horrifying things?
I can't speak to that particular company, but I can tell you that's the kind of company that we are definitely speaking with.